Hi, Mike Ratner, and I'm going to do this sweet and quick or fast and dirty, whatever way you love it. So this is a component for Loving Conversations, which is both a podcast and a book and research. It's really quite interesting that every morning I pretty much am going through journals or pages, Wikipedia, and then scrolling down to those references and clicking through to PDFs and studies. We're talking about sociology studies. Reading one about self-esteem that was published in 1965, and yet the way it was constructed, you'd think, wow, relevant for today. They're studying adolescents, basically teens, and kids in high school. And while that's formative, and it's, close to 400 pages, I only really read the first few, so I'm just getting started on that. So not much more to say about it, but the wonderment is, has there been a more recent study to sort of see the temperament of our kids these days? Look, I'm sure there are some studies, but this was a nationally done one. I think they had 5,000 respondents from different schools around the country, were guidance counselors, principals, and those teachers involved in the research participated. So I'm sure there are. I'll have to engage the idea more, but if not, I was thinking, it'd be interesting to do some kind of research poll, see where kids are, a couple years past the pandemic and so forth. It is part of that outreach that is important. In doing Loving Conversations, so this will be found at lovingconversations.com or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Okay, this is going to be a little bit more of a difficult matter because the whole concept of loving conversations is, on the outset, sounds very promising. I personally love engaging conversations. So that in itself is like having that dynamic dialogue, to me, is divine. Really, it's like, wow. It's the best because I'm getting to know you, your thoughts, and we're sharing and engaging. And the quality of that, we're participating in each other's life or an experience, and creating what I call a metasphere, sort of a social atmosphere, just between us. Now, that quality of engagement, can be enhanced and brought out by being attuned or paying attention to what it is as a goal. And for me, having a loving conversation is what that is. So in the past, to get my way, or sort of maybe the conversation might turn into a debate or an argument. The idea was to win it or to get my way, which might have meant manipulating or doing whatever. Look, it was such a long time ago in my past, but I'm cognizant of it because of the impacts and effects it had on other people, and some where they chose other than to continue the line of communication between us. So with that being cut off, there was no chance for a loving conversation. So maybe in some realm or experience that you have had in your life, there might be someone or some time where you can be cognizant of where communication was cut off. Now, the goal in the dream perhaps would be to have that connection again and to re-engage on a certain level to where you could re-experience loving conversations as you had before, or take it to a whole new level in this dimension, which is what I'm qualifying as this new research or a way. And again, I'm very careful about having a patterned approach. It's really sort of a set of criteria that if we can agree on it, it's mutual and there's a consensus rather than coercion. Because otherwise it's sort of like, it's not really the quality I'm aiming at. And it's probably a product of maturity, over time to go, well, let's have a conversation, a loving conversation, what qualifies it, because if we can define it, maybe we can exalt it and sort of have less of the disarray that causes the breakdown in communication. Now, of course, if something needs to be attended to, there's some responsibility lacking or something else at issue, we want to be response able and take care of it responsibly, right? Makes sense. So to do so and to help this process along, the qualities of having a loving conversation ought to be defined. And when you have that opportunity with that person or persons, you don't want to blow it, right? And so this particular talk and this is just me for this podcast, although I do hope to be interviewing other experts and people who can offer their insights into loving conversations and having them more often or even better than ever. There's one sticky point, which would be when the other person doesn't want to have anything to do with you. So not just a conversation, but that's it. So it's closed off. Now, it could be for really good reasons, right? And it could be something that you're never going to be able to change in this lifetime. However, you always want to be prepared for the strange knock on the door in the middle of the night, or the phone call or text, the email offering an invite. But we can't, wait and just hope. So part of the process at least would be to engage with yourself, and this is something on what Krishnamurti, who I find pretty interesting if you want to Google his work and writings, of the observer being observed. And what I mean is that as we think about ourselves, this is my most recent writing, by the way. Go to igoism.com. It's IGOISM, igoism, igoism.com. And I'm just making a distinction from the ego to what identity is projected in our imagined world that I describe as, or call the BIDEC, BIDECK, .masstrance.com for that specific writing, but those links are in egoism.com, rather. It is writing about ego versus ego, making the distinction that this projected identity and how we imagine it, qualify it, and most of us totally other than aware that that's our projection, our thinking of who we are and how we're to engage. So that in itself is representing who you are in the community conversation or the loving conversation. This is a part of the dynamic that plays out, at least in our mind, of who we are projecting or who we imagine ourselves to be, that's engaging or participating in the conversation. And that's really important because that sort of defines our character. And sometimes it could be accurate, and sometimes it's really just a bit of pretense and things that aren't really quite really accurately perceived by the other side. And sometimes there are some people like myself who think they're saying something, but it's heard differently on the other side. So an important dynamic in this quality community conversation or loving conversation, those are both projects of mine, communityconversations.com and lovingconversations.com. So one on the micro, one on the macro. We want to examine the qualities of the participant, and it's really more the I, because otherwise we're pretty much judgmental or living an illusion that is out there. But really what we might be other than aware of and not qualifying is that the response that we're getting is really the impact or the cause of how we're presenting something, an idea that's not being presented quite right or really doesn't sort of grab the attention or interest. So these are things that you have to refine and hone in on just at the starting point, inflection point, before we light that match and engage, is to make sure we have their interest in the level and quality of participation that we want. And that goes into my tie principle. You always want to have a great, loving, engaging tie with people, a karma-free tie, because if you don't have a good relationship tie, then the quality of that conversation in this regard, even though it could be a really loving conversation, you got to start with this first premise. And TIE is another acronym of mine, but yet I think that holds the dynamic because this type of quality conversation has to be very permission-oriented, almost in any type of engagement before I go into someone's space. The number one question, the TIE, the tie principle, if you're going to have a loving, engaging, karma-free tie, is to ask permission for their time. Is this a good time to talk? Is now a good time? And say, hey, I just need 5 minutes of your time. Would now be good? Begin to qualify it a bit more. And if it's not, because the person's really busy, and it's particularly like in the middle of a phone call and you're interrupting them, or a conversation, or something else is going on, they're rushing to the airport, and you just say, hey, this will only take 15 minutes, so, at least offer them a ride, get them to the airport, and then have the conversation along the way. Just giving that example that we're not often considerate of other people's time. And a loving conversation has to show high levels of consideration because it's respect for that person's time to begin with. So check it in if this is a good time, and if not, it's not a good time, then you might ask, well, when would it? Now, maybe you just have to come back in a few minutes because they just need to finish up something. But otherwise, you could find out when might be good for them, and then you schedule it. You both have an appointment, and you put it on your calendar, so it's really there. So now you've got something, and you qualified. I just needed 15 minutes of your time, bro. Man, I got to talk to you about these things, all right. And then so that's the T in the time, and then the I in the tie, right? T-I-E, the I in the tie, is really make sure that this is going to be of interest to them. So the time and the topic, the things I want to talk to you about have to be of interest, because if it's not of interest, it's like, it's not easy for them to go there. So it has to be something of interest to them, and it might be something that you could frame it that would be intriguing in the way that you make it interesting. Otherwise, you might also just describe what the intention is. Like, well, the reason I need to talk to you is about this, and this because it's important. I hope to have your interest. So if they get intrigued, they'll go, yeah, let's definitely talk about that topic. And you can have my time for this period of time. So what's the E? We've got time, interest, and the E. So T-I-E would be what? Now, I get all these different responses. So all the answers in some level are correct because that's your perception of the quality of what this engagement would be. So yeah, it would be the quality of engagement, but that's set in the metasphere. So I would talk about the environment as one. So environment would be like, well, I've had situations where people get together, but we're constantly interrupted, or it's really too noisy, or like, man, this place smells bad, so no one can focus on having a great, engaging community conversation or loving conversation. You just, it's just not going to happen in the way that you love it. So environment's really important to pay attention to the environment. If people are kind of listening in where they shouldn't be, that could be something where other people's attention kind of going back and forth could cause them to not really pay attention. Now, the deeper level of this is really what I call the energy. So time, interest, and energy. T-I-E, time, interest, and energy. Permission for the time. They've got their interest. You got to check into their energy. They could say, hey, man, let's talk now. I got time and I'm interested in this. But then like a minute later, they're nodding off, or you just kind of feel like, they're just not quite there energy-wise. Well, that's important to tune into. So you do it, you adjust, maybe they're thirsty, or you switch seats, or you get up and walk and talk, whatever that could be. But that quality, that fine quality of attunement to this idea, this principle, being very permission-oriented, being very considerate to the others. And that is qualifying first. Is this a good time? Is this topic of interest? And is this energetically of engagement and the environment? Is it all good? And you just got to constantly check in a little bit, because you might have gone overtime. You know what I mean? And then maybe you went off topic a bit or something. So sort of a bit of attunement can go a long way. And this level of consciousness sort of reflects what I describe as ultra being present, ultra being attuned, loving, and considered in this regard. It really goes a long way into sort of bringing down the old structures or the institutions that sort of prohibit or have limited us in the past, because they haven't evolved in the way that we could consciously move the dialogue or the dynamic forward. And that's what my work is really all about. Sort of wreck the old, bring in the new, but elegantly do it so no one's hurt. Everyone kind of goes, oh yeah, shake it off, like, man, this is way better. So we could talk about the rec formula another time. It's just a way of being really welcoming and real, and the experience that shows that consideration to an extreme level of kindness that people, wow, they just want to have this kindness, quality of company and engagement. And that's really what it goes about, right? Having, really great company. To me, is the seed that's sort of really the basis of having a loving conversation, and the experience within of having this dynamic dialogue, what I call divine, really, of really just being with you, or you being with that person, what that brings about. So to have that is really the goal. And then whatever comes out of it is really, it's free. It's not restricted to maybe perhaps that initial a point of conversation. It could be a point of departure where the things that were relevant and important were decided, or at least were covered, so that this was a whole-brained, good for the whole dynamic, holistic in the way that, everything that you were concerned about got covered and what I wanted to talk about got covered. And we searched around to see if there was anything missing or not, the elephant in the room. Sort of everything sort of came to the forefront. And then, with this pureness, truth and honesty prevail because there's nothing else.